Welcome. Thank you for joining us yet again. Today we have a very interesting topic that we will be discussing that has become an area of concern in the last couple of years following the aftermath of COVID-19. To discuss this topic is Dr. Chris Namada, who has a medical professional spanning over 25 years, 16 of which have been in the clinical medicine area, and has recently ventured into HR administration with a medical incline. And we are going to be discussing about mental health. Welcome, Dr. Chris.
Thank you, Agnes.
Dr. Chris, very briefly, perhaps you could let us know what is mental health and why is it important?
I think the World Health Organization gives us a very, very good definition of mental health. And it can be described as a state of well-being. Mm-hmm. Well-being in the sense that a person realizes that they have potential. Every one of us is born with potential. And so if a person has well-being, they can be able to realize that they have potential. And they can be able to cope with life's stresses. If you can be able to cope with life stresses, then we say you are in a state of mental health, mental well-being. Again, in that particular state, this person can work and be productive in society, and finally, they are able to make a contribution to the community. So looking at those particular 4 points, that they realize that they have their own potential, they can cope with stressors in the environment, they can work productively and fruitfully, and finally, they are able to make contribution to the community. That is what will be described as a state of well-being.
Thank you. What would you describe as bad mental health in that case?
In contrast to good mental health, bad mental health will be seen as a person who finds it very difficult to manage the way that they feel. For instance, if you get a misfortune, say you are applying for a job and the job didn't come through, you may tend to feel a little bit sad, or because you have lost something, or in the instance that you, in the case where you lose a loved one, or lose a job, or something, untoward happens, to you. A person who has good mental health will be able to respond to that in a normal way, and by the normal way I mean they're able to cope with that particular, activity. But a person who has bad mental health cannot be able to control the way that they feel. And, that is when depression sets in, and, and they are unable, you find that they are weeping all the time because they have, not been able to get a job, or they have lost their job, and so on and so forth. So that's bad mental health. Again, a person with bad mental health cannot be able to control the way that in which they act. For instance, and this we find I want to use an example we find common in children. When you find a child who throws a tantrum over something very small, if that continues, into adulthood, and you find that a person cannot be able to control the way they act, say they are reprimanded by their boss, and rather than taking the reprimand, as something positive and saying, yes, I'm sorry, I'm going to change, they throw a tantrum. If somebody behaves that way over and over and over again, then they have bad mental health.
Okay. Yeah. How would you advise somebody to take care of their mental health? What are the practical things that one can do to take care about their mental health?
There are one or few things that people can do in managing stress. But the first thing that a person would want to do in managing stress is to admit that they have a problem. Because a problem identified is a problem solved. So if the person can admit that they have a problem then they are more likely to seek for assistance, either from their peers or from somebody more senior to them, or somebody older than them, or somebody more mature than them, rather than keeping to themselves. So first of all, admit that you have a problem. That is the first step towards being able to manage stress. Secondly, after having identified that you have a problem, it would be prudent to seek for assistance, because sometimes you have a problem, and because you have never experienced this kind of a problem before, you have no experience in it. You have no experience in being able to know how to deal with such a problem. So if you have such a problem, then the best way to deal with it would be to seek for assistance. And seeking for assistance, I mean assistance from either a peer, or if it's a child in school, from their teacher, or if it's somebody within the working environment, either from a fellow colleague, or even from a professional counselor.
So it's important to recognize and admit that the issue is there, and secondly, to seek for assistance.
Exactly.
Thank you. Dr. Chris, I know that you are not just a professional, but you are also a spirit-filled, born-again Christian. Mm-hmm. Tell us what the Bible says about our mental health.
Jesus himself knew that, we as human beings are fallible. We have our own weaknesses. And he did talk about issues of mental health. But I just want to look at, in the Bible, some of the verses that you find there that talk about mental health. And one is found in Proverbs chapter 17, verse 22, which says that a cheerful heart is good medicine, but a crushed spirit dries up the bones. And that just goes out to tell you that if you live with people and create a lifestyle where there is happiness and cheerfulness in you all the time, you're more likely to deal with problems when they come than when you are on your own and you are unhappy and you are fearful and you face problems and you don't know how to deal with them.
Yes.
Another verse that I know that I have seen in the book of Matthew, in chapter 6, verse 34 says, that take therefore no thought for the morrow shall take thought for the things of itself. Sufficient unto the day is the evil thereof. And here what the Bible is telling us as Christians is to stop worrying. Stop worrying, because worry in itself isn't a healthy thing. The more you worry, the more you are likely to lose your cool and lose your confidence and begin getting into depression. So the Bible actually tells us not to worry, and because tomorrow has more worries of its own, so let's not worry about tomorrow. Mm-hmm. So basically we see that the Bible has several verses that talk about issues of mental health.
Thank you. So it's important for us as believers, it's important for us as human beings to understand how God has created us and to understand how God wants us to function for us to maintain mental health. Is that what you're saying?
Precisely.
Thank you. So how does stress relate to mental illness?
Stress in itself, and as I had mentioned earlier, that a person who has a good state or a mental state of well-being is a person who is able to cope with stress. And so initially, and all of us face stressful situations in our lives at whatever level. And for instance, you wake up in the morning, you are late for work, you try and rush out, you miss the bus, that's stress in itself. Or you've gone to a supermarket to buy something, the queue is long, it is hot, and it begins to harassing you. You know, that is stress in itself. So we all face these stressful situations. However, our bodies are made in such a way that they can be able to develop defenses towards these particular stressful situations. However, stressful situations over a long period of time which are not dealt with become chronic stress. And if you are stressed continuously, time and time again, and that stress is not dealt with, it becomes chronic stress, and you basically get into a stage we call burnout. Now, if burnout is not dealt with, and you keep on adding more stress to the burnout, you could then end up with a mental illness.
Dr. Chris, you have introduced a new term there, burnout. How do I tell that I'm at the point of burnout?
Now, when a person is stressed, their bodies respond to the stress. And if a person, say, loses a loved one, they will weep. That's a natural response to stress. They will grieve. That's a natural response to stress. But if the grief is not dealt with, and it goes on and on and on and on for a long period of time, that person begins behaving in a manner that is likely to suggest that they have burnout. They may lose interest in staying with others. They may begin to forget things. Their bodies may begin to function in a way that does not seem to be normal, such as lacking adequate sleep, so on and so forth. So when your body begins to give you these telltale signs, then you know that you're getting into an environment of burnout. You have constant headaches, you're constantly worried, you're constantly weeping, you want to disassociate yourself from your friends and so on and so forth, then you are entering into a state of burnout.
And at this point, you need to get help.
At that point, you definitely need to get help, and professional help. Because at that level, if the social support system has not been able to deal with your stress, then you are likely to need the help of somebody who has been trained and is qualified as a counselor to be able to assist you get out of burnout.
Okay. So what would you say are the causes of stress, other than our day-to-day activities that, like you've said, you wake up in the morning, you have run late, you've missed the bus, and you have a deadline to meet, and all that is giving you stress. Mm-hmm. What are the other causes of stress?
There are several, but among the first that I would want to talk about personality factors. That there are certain personality types that are more prone to get stressed than others. For instance, Friedman and Rosenman. This is a book written by two scientists called Friedman and Rosenman, who are psychologists in California. They found that people who have what they called type A style, whereas the other people in another control group, which they called type B personality characteristics, were relaxed, friendly, and easygoing. Now, what has been found is that people who exhibit type A personality characteristics are more likely to get stressed. So therefore, if you are a person who is excessively competitive, you are a go-getter, you are hard-driven, you drive yourself hard, you are impatient all the time, you want things to be done quickly, and you tend to have a hostile nature, to things that come your way that don't, sit in well with you, then you are more likely to have stress. Another cause of stress would be what psychologists call hardiness characteristics. And in hardiness is from the word hard. You have people who have commitment, they have control, and they perceive problems as challenges. Those are people who have hardiness characteristics. Mm-hmm. Whereas on the other side, you have people who do not have hardiness characteristics. They tend to be alienated from other people. They tend to segregate themselves from other people, and people who are of an introverted personality may sit in this category of people. When they encounter a problem, they see themselves as being powerless. You know, they're in a state of powerlessness, and they perceive problems as threats rather than challenges. So you find that people who do not have hardiness characteristics, which I mentioned earlier, who are committed, they are self-controlled, they perceive problems as challenges. These ones are less likely to get stress, whereas those ones who are alienated, they are powerless, they find, they tend to feel powerless when they have a problem, and they see a problem as a threat. Those ones are more likely to get stressed. And then there are other factors like environmental factors which are also causing stress. And in the environment, you'll find that conflict becomes one of the issues that it causes stress. And you mentioned earlier when we were beginning that during the post-COVID era, we have seen a lot of people having stress. And it was pretty evident during the times when we had lockdowns and people were sitting at home that there were a lot of conflicts within families.
Yes.
So conflict is a form of and a cause of stress. Another cause of stress would be things like overload and burnout. If you are overloaded with work in your work environment, and you tend to keep being given more work and more work and more work, that in itself begins to tire you, and you may enter into the state which I talked about earlier of burnout. Mm-hmm. So work overload is also another cause of stress. And then, of course, we have got work-related stress. In the workplace, you have people who may lose their job. If you lose your job, that's work-related stress because you've lost a job. Yes. Or you have heavy workload, or you work in an environment where there are few promotional opportunities, and you feel you are seated in a rut, you've sat in the same position for many, many, many years. That begins to cause a lot of stress. There is no promotion coming. Or you have just poor interpersonal relationship with your fellow workers. That in itself will cause stress. And then, of course, life's daily hassles, life events and daily hassles, the death of a loved one, death of a family member, that in itself can cause stress. For women, pregnancy is a cause of stress. Carrying a baby for 9 months, it creates a lot of demand on your body, and that causes stress. A severe illness, or injury can cause stress. If you are involved in an accident and you lose one of your body parts, like an arm or a leg, that would cause you stress because then you become dependent upon others. Or a disease that is so severe that it debilitates you and you have to depend on other people, in itself can cause stress. Things like financial difficulties, like during the COVID era, people lost their jobs and they lost their income. That brings a lot of stress, And simple things such as, being caught up in traffic. The traffic jams we have in Nairobi, for instance. You've come from work, you are tired, you want to get home easy and rest, but there's too much traffic on the road and you stick in the jam from 6 o'clock up to 7, 8, 9 p.m. By the time you get home, you are completely wasted, and that in itself causes stress.